"Move it, old man! You're holding up the line!" The soldier behind the serving counter said it loud enough for 6 people to hear. The man at the front of the mess hall line was wearing civilian clothes, a plain gray sweatshirt, khaki trousers, a pair of worn hiking boots that had seen real mileage. He was carrying a plastic tray with scrambled eggs and black coffee and a single piece of toast, and he had paused for just a moment to look at a photograph taped to the wall above the steam trays. Nobody else had looked at that photograph in weeks, maybe months. He didn't react to the words, didn't tense, didn't turn around fast. He simply looked at the photo for one more second, set his tray down, and moved to an empty table at the far end of the hall. Nobody in that mess hall knew who he was. Nobody knew that in 40 minutes, 2 soldiers at a table 12 feet away were going to describe an operation, quietly, between themselves over powdered eggs and bad coffee, that was going to stop him cold, that was going to make him set down his fork and go very, very still. That was going to change what happened in that base before the week was out. Have you ever been in a room where the person with the most power was the one nobody looked at twice? Let me take you back. 4 days earlier. General Marcus Webb had not slept in a real bed for 11 days. Not because he couldn't. He had a room at the base commander's residence at Fort Carver, Alabama, with a mattress that was softer than anything he'd slept on in the field, but because he had learned across 31 years of service that what you see from a command suite and what you see from a mess hall at 0600 are 2 different countries entirely. He had first learned this at 23, as a second lieutenant, when his battalion commander had visited a forward operating base and spent 3 hours in a briefing room and 0 hours talking to the privates who ran the supply chain. Webb had watched how much those privates knew and how none of it had traveled upward. He had never forgotten it. He was now 57 years old and wore 3 stars. He commanded one of the largest logistics and operational support structures in the United States Army. He oversaw training doctrine, supply chain integration, and operational readiness for a network of installations across 6 states. He had been in rooms with 2 presidents. He had testified before the Senate Armed Services Committee on 4 separate occasions. He had a photograph on the wall of his office at the Pentagon that showed him shaking hands with a man whose name appears in history books. He had asked his aide, Major Denise Carver, to arrange a 4-day informal inspection of Fort Carver under civilian cover. No advance notice to base command, no official visit protocol, no staff car, no salutes. He checked in under the name M. Webb, listed as a Department of Defense contractor conducting facility assessments. His aide had used that cover exactly once before, 2 years earlier at a different installation, and what that inspection had found had resulted in 3 officers losing their commands and a congressional inquiry that lasted 18 months. Fort Carver's commanding officer was Colonel Gerald Stanton. Colonel Stanton had held the post for 2 years. His performance reviews were clean, his facilities were maintained on paper, his readiness reports came in on time and in the correct format. General Webb had read all of it and found it completely unremarkable, which was itself a kind of signal if you knew how to read it. Things at a real installation are never perfectly unremarkable. Something always rubs, something always chafes. The absence of any friction whatsoever meant, in Webb's experience, that someone was managing the picture. On his first day in civilian cover, Webb had walked the motor pool, the supply depot, and the training facilities. He had a notepad. He wrote things down. He spoke to a few enlisted soldiers in passing, casual, brief, the way a contractor might check a detail. He did not introduce himself. He did not correct anyone who treated him dismissively. He had been called sir once by a staff sergeant who had simply mistaken him for a senior civilian, and he had nodded and moved on. On day 2, he had spent time in the administrative buildings, reviewing posted notices, looking at complaint and grievance logs that were public-facing. He found 2 things that interested him. First, a grievance form submitted by a corporal 8 months ago regarding training safety protocols, filed, acknowledged, and then closed without resolution notes, just closed, as if someone had simply put a lid on it. Second, a shift in the maintenance request logs, showing that a specific category of equipment, a type of communication relay system used in field exercises, had been marked as operational when the repair orders suggested otherwise. He wrote both down. He circled them. He drew a small line between them, because in 31 years, you develop a sense for when things are connected. On the morning of day 3, he went to the mess hall at 6:15. He was early. He got his tray. He paused at the photograph. It was a unit photograph, a squad photo taken in a desert environment, 12 soldiers in full kit, squinting into a sun you couldn't see. Someone had handwritten a date along the bottom edge in permanent marker. The date was 14 months ago. Below the date, in different handwriting, someone had written 8 names. Just names. No rank, no context. 8 out of 12. Webb had been in enough places to know what 8 names below a group photo meant. He took his tray to the far table. He ate slowly. He watched the room fill up. 2 soldiers settled at the table 12 feet away. Webb could tell from posture and habit that they had been in the field recently. There was a particular way people carry themselves in the first week back, a looseness that is really a kind of held tension finally letting go. They were young. One was a specialist from what Webb could estimate, the other might have been a corporal. They did not look around the room. They were tired in the specific way that has nothing to do with sleep. They talked quietly. Webb was not trying to listen. But the mess hall at 6:15 is not loud, and the human ear, trained across decades in the field to pick up quiet important things amid noise, does not stop working just because you are eating toast. He heard the word Kessler. He heard it a second time. He set down his fork. Kessler was the name of one of the communication relay systems in the maintenance logs, the one marked operational when the repair orders said otherwise. He listened. The specialist was talking. He was not telling a story for an audience. He was telling it the way people tell things they have been trying not to think about but cannot stop thinking about. He said they had been in a field exercise 14 months ago. He said the relay went down during a simulated tactical scenario. He said it had gone down not because of terrain interference or battery failure, the 2 explanations they had been given, but because the unit had never been repaired after a fault logged 6 weeks before the exercise. He said 3 of the 8 soldiers lost in the accident. It had been called an accident, had been in a position they should never have occupied because the positioning order had been based on communication data from a relay that was not functioning. He said the positioning order had come from above the squad level. He said that was the part nobody had asked about publicly. He said the inquiry had been closed. He said he had filed a statement 14 months ago and had been told it was under review. He had followed up 6 times. The last time he followed up, he was told the matter was considered resolved. He said the photograph up there was why he still came to the early sitting, so he could look at it before anyone else came in. Webb sat very still. His tray was in front of him. His coffee had gone cold. He was looking at the table surface, not at the 2 soldiers, because if he looked at them right now, something in his face would change, and he was not ready for that. He reached into the pocket of his gray sweatshirt. He had a small pocket notebook, the same kind he had carried since his first deployment, a plain black field notes book with a rubber band around it. He opened it. He wrote a name. He wrote a date. He wrote the word relay. He drew a box around it. He finished his coffee. He stood up with his tray. He walked past the photograph on his way to the tray return. He stopped in front of it. He counted the 8 names again. He looked at the faces. He had done this on the way in, but this time it was different. This time he had context. He went back to his room. He called Major Carver. He said, "Push everything. I need 48 hours. She knew what that meant. She had heard him say it once before. He spent that day and the next doing what he did when he needed to understand something completely. He went to the documents. He requested through the DoD contractor access he had been given for the cover, the maintenance logs for the Kessler relay units assigned to Fort Carver's training division. He requested the incident report from the field exercise 14 months ago. He requested the inquiry file. The inquiry file came back in a redacted form. Standard. But the redaction pattern itself was information. 14 pages redacted out of 22, in a file that described what had officially been categorized as an equipment malfunction, with no attributable human error. That ratio, that specific ratio, Webb had been doing this long enough to know that a 70% redaction rate on a closed inquiry with no attributed fault meant the inquiry had found fault and the finding had been managed. He called a colleague at the Inspector General's office that afternoon. He did not identify himself by name. He described the documents. He described the timeline. He described the specialist's account. The colleague on the other end of the phone asked 2 questions and went quiet. Then she said, "Send me the maintenance logs." He sent them that evening. On the morning of day 4, Webb returned to the mess hall at 6:15. The serving counter had a different soldier on it today. This one called him Sir when he asked for eggs, and Webb thanked him and moved to the same table at the far end. He had his tray, he had his coffee, he had his notebook. At 6:38, Colonel Gerald Stanton walked into the mess hall. He was not in the habit of coming to the mess hall at this hour. That was one of the things you could tell from how the room responded to him. A slight adjustment, a sitting up, the particular attention that a room gives to a person it is not used to seeing in it. Stanton got coffee. He looked around. His eyes passed over the far table where a man in a gray sweatshirt was eating eggs. They moved on. He sat with 2 of his staff officers at a center table. Webb finished his eggs. He finished his coffee. He stood. He walked across the mess hall with his tray and stopped at Colonel Stanton's table. He said, "Good morning, Colonel." Stanton looked up. His face did what faces do when they are trying to place someone and failing. Webb reached into his sweatshirt pocket. He placed a folded document on the table in front of Stanton. The document was his identification and credentials, not the contractor cover, his actual credentials, the ones with the 3 stars and the title and the authority that came with them. The color left Stanton's face in a way that Webb had seen before and never enjoyed seeing. It was the color of a man who understands, all at once, the full distance between where he is and where he should have been. Webb said, "We're going to need a room." What followed was not the end of anything, it was the beginning of the kind of accountability that moves slowly and leaves marks. The Inspector General's investigation, formally opened within 72 hours, covered 3 areas. The maintenance records of the Kessler relay units, the conduct of the post-exercise inquiry, and the handling of the specialist's 14-month-old statement. 4 separate investigators were assigned. They were on site at Fort Carver within a week. Colonel Stanton was relieved of command pending the investigation. The announcement used the standard language in order to facilitate a thorough and impartial review, and was distributed through official channels the way these things are, with no drama and a great deal of weight. He had served 21 years. He had 3 commendations on his record and 1 decision in his past that had never been examined the way it deserved to be, and now it was. The inquiry file was unsealed. The actual findings, the ones that had been managed before, the ones that had sat under 14 pages of redaction, entered the record fully. They showed that the positioning error that had placed those soldiers in danger had been traceable to a communication failure that was itself traceable to a maintenance backlog that had been knowingly deferred for budget reasons. The deferral had been documented. The documentation had existed for 14 months. The specialist gave a formal statement to the IG investigators. He was 23 years old. He sat in a small room and described, again, what he had described 14 months earlier. And this time someone wrote it down in a way that would not be filed and forgotten. He cried during one part of it and did not apologize for crying. The investigator across from him did not ask him to move on. The 8 families were notified, not of new deaths, but of new facts. That is its own kind of notification. Some of them had suspected. Some of them had been told the official version so many times they had almost believed it. The notification went to each family individually, through the casualty affairs process, and then through a written communication from the Secretary of the Army that described, in direct language, what had been found and what had been withheld and what the Army intended to do about it. The letter did not use the phrase administrative error. Webb had been asked to review a draft of the letter. That phrase had been in the draft. It was not in the final version. 7 officers and senior NCOs received formal letters of reprimand. 2 were recommended for separation. The third-party review of the inquiry process resulted in new guidance, published, distributed, and added to training doctrine, governing the handling of equipment-related incident reports at installation level. The guidance was named, at Webb's insistence, not for a policy or a regulation number but for the date of the field exercise, so it would not become anonymous, so it would mean something when people read it. General Webb submitted his own after-action report to the Secretary of the Army 6 weeks after his return from Fort Carver. It was 17 pages. The first page was a summary. The second page was the photograph, the unit photo from the mess hall wall, 8 names handwritten along the bottom edge. He had asked permission to include it. It was granted. He also noted in the report's final section the serving soldier who had told him to move it at the mess hall line on the first morning. He did not recommend discipline. He recommended context. He wrote, "Junior enlisted soldiers who have not been taught to see the person in front of them have been failed by the institution that formed them. The correction is structural, not punitive." That section was later excerpted in a training document used in leadership development courses. 1 year after the investigation closed, General Webb attended a ceremony at Fort Carver. He had asked for a small ceremony, not a large one. The post had commissioned a permanent installation in the memory of the 8 soldiers, a simple stone marker outside the training facility, bearing names and dates, and a single line from a field manual that every soldier in that building had read, a line about the commander's responsibility to those in their charge. The specialist was there. He was a sergeant now. He had re-enlisted. Webb shook his hand and said something private, and the sergeant nodded once and looked at the marker for a long moment. He did not say anything. He didn't need to. In the pocket of his dress uniform, Webb still carried the black field notes notebook with the rubber band around it. On the page with the name, the date, and the word relay with a box around it, he had written one more thing that morning before the ceremony. He had written it small in the bottom corner of the page. It said, "They were heard." If this story moved you, if you've ever watched the truth sit in a drawer while someone managed the paperwork above it, share it. Like and subscribe and tell me, have you ever filed something, reported something, told the truth about something and been told it was resolved when you knew it wasn't? Leave that in the comments. Here's what really gets me. This whole thing started because a general went to breakfast. Not to inspect, not to investigate. He went to eat toast and look at a photograph that nobody else was looking at anymore. He was the most powerful person in that building, and he was invisible. And because he was invisible, 2 young soldiers said the true thing out loud, the thing they had been carrying for 14 months. The institution had given them a closed file and a non-answer and the expectation that silence was the same as resolution. It is never the same. Marcus Webb knew that. He sat at the far table and listened, and he wrote a name in a notebook, and 8 families received a letter that told the truth. Power, when it is used right, makes space for people to be heard, not at a podium. At a mess hall table at 6:15 in the morning with bad coffee and the kind of attention that changes things. What truth have you been carrying? What file of yours is sitting closed with the wrong notation on it? Tell me, I'm listening.